Hey everyone, I'm Mike Settele, and in this lesson, I'm going to walk you through the knowledge and skills section of the reading portion of the SAT score report. So when you get actual scores back, you're going to get the numbers that you probably care about the most out of 1600 and then out of 800 for both reading and math. But you're also going to get these charts that give you this little extra feedback about what you did wrong in each individual section. But for someone who's not a tutor, this is probably unintelligible. And even for me, it's very hard to understand what these boxes mean. You probably know that more black boxes filled in is good and a couple white ones are bad, but other than that, this is not really giving you information on what specifically to improve. So I hope to both give you a sense of what these categories mean and give you maybe some better categories to think about as you review your practice tests, and that can help you improve your scores even more easily. So let's dive into what these mean. The first category here, information and ideas. I'm just going to read this description that the College Board puts on their website for this grouping, okay? So just bear with me for a second. Information and ideas measures comprehension, analysis, and reasoning skills and knowledge, and the ability to locate, interpret, evaluate, and integrate information and ideas from text and informational graphics, tables, bar graphs, and line graphs. If you got lost in that, I totally understand. It barely makes sense to me. Look at all these ands. Where does this list begin and end and then connected with other lists? What is going on? The College Board, just so you know, as you start your practice, the College Board is really, really good at writing SAT questions, okay? All the official practice tests on the Bluebook app, really great. All the practice questions you find in other random places on the College Board's network of practice sites, also really, really great. But they are terrible at answering those questions and providing you with valid feedback that you can use to actually make sense of your scores and your wrong answers. That is where I come in. So when it comes to taking tests, go to the College Board. When it comes to reviewing them, come to me because I'm going to be much better. So let's take another crack at this information and ideas grouping. What does this really consist of? Well, the most obvious piece of that description was that there are graphs and charts involved. And a lot of these questions are really just about reading the graph and the chart. Nothing else is involved. You just go to the right row or column or line or bar, whatever it may be, and you just give them the information that they're asking for. Some will be a little bit more in-depth. They will all come with a passage, but some will really require you to understand the main idea of that passage. And there are a lot of questions within this grouping that are also about the main idea, and they don't have a chart or a graph at all. They are just a 5 to 10 sentence passage, and we need to understand the main idea of that. The question will explicitly ask for it. Other times they will ask for something more specific. I would think of this more like the main idea of a specific sentence within the passage rather than the entire passage itself. And then other times they're going to ask about the main idea in kind of weird SAT ways. They might ask for you to illustrate the claim, which is basically a way of saying summarize what the summary, the main idea is. So we can kind of do the same kind of thinking there. Other times they'll ask for a little bit extra. We need to either support or undermine the claim. So we're basically adding a little extra to the passage to kind of continue a thought. And then the most SAT-like question here are going to be the ones that ask you to logically complete the text. These are cases where we get a blank at the end of a passage and we're kind of giving the conclusion. We're finishing it off and just kind of providing what the main idea was building towards the entire time. So those are a little harder, a little trickier, but all in all, these questions always involve passages. They're not the long passages that used to be on previous versions of the SAT. These are never more than 10 sentences, but they're still going to involve some reading and then understanding what the passage is saying by looking at the different answer choices, usually using some version of process of elimination. But there's a little confusion here because the next category of craft and structure questions also includes some passage questions. So again, let's look at the College Board's terrible description. Craft and structure measures the comprehension, vocabulary, analysis, synthesis, and reasoning skills and knowledge needed to understand and use high utility words and phrases in context, evaluate texts rhetorically, and make connections between topically related texts. So again, those and, you got a lot of that there. So let's try this again. Let's break this down in a much more intelligible way. Most of these questions are going to be vocabulary questions. Literally, you have a passage, but there's only a one-word answer. It's a blank where you fill in the best vocabulary word. Those are very straightforward. But some of them will still be like the information and ideas ones. They're going to involve a passage. And this time, though, instead of asking for the main idea, they're asking for the main purpose. And so for some reason, the SAT thinks that that's a different skill. I personally don't. I'm going to recategorize all this stuff later. So you'll see I don't really care so much about main idea versus main purpose, but the SAT does put these in separate categories. So if you're struggling with both, it's going to show up in two different places. Some of the questions will also just ask for the function of a specific sentence, an underlined portion. That's kind of similar to what we saw before. Sometimes it's not the main idea of the entire passage, it's just more about one line. But others are going to also include two passages, not many, and they're still very, very short, but these questions fit in this category. That's why it appeared in the description earlier. So basically, the big passage questions, what we think about for the reading section, is actually split into these two different categories, which makes it a little confusing to know what you're struggling with, since it's not as simplistic as we might like. These categories kind of overlap in weird ways. Let's move on to the expression of ideas category. That also sounds like what we've been talking about. Expression of ideas, like the main idea, right? Well, no, these are a little different. So here's the description. Expression of ideas measures the ability to revise text to improve the effectiveness of written expression and to meet specific rhetorical goals. I have no idea what that means. That is complete gibberish to me, but luckily this is a really easy category. It consists of two question types. Transition questions, where we have a blank and we're filling it in with words like however, furthermore, therefore. We're connecting two ideas, and then others that are going to give us an outline of facts, and we just need to kind of give the SAT what it's looking for. It's going to ask for a specific kind of sentence that gets a certain information across, and we just have to give it to them. So we'll talk more about that later, but these two questions, even though they're in the same category, they're completely different from each other, in my opinion. So I don't know why we're grouping them together. There's different skills involved in these two. Luckily, the last category here, standard English conventions, this is basically just going to be the grammar section here. So this is a really straightforward category. I know that they have both in the description and the title this kind of weird way of talking about it, but this is grammar. This one is straightforward. And yes, there are different rules about punctuation and usage that you're going to need. That's for another lesson. But for now, just understand that at least these questions are kind of a coherent group. Now, the other thing that makes me annoyed about the College Board is they have these four categories, and I just went in order of how they'll appear on the score report, but that order is not how they will appear on the actual test. The craft and structure questions are going to be first, then information and ideas, then the standard English conventions, and then the expression of ideas. So I don't know why the order is all jumbled. That really makes no sense to me. And the order is important here. So I have made my own categories to better understand what's going on in the reading section so we can try to improve in a much more logical way. So if you take a practice test, I strongly encourage you to go to my YouTube channel, to go to my website, to review that test. I have literally a video for every single question that explains it, in my opinion, in much better ways than the College Board explanations do. And I categorize the questions differently so that it's easier to understand where you're struggling. First of all, I take those craft and structure questions and I separate out the vocabulary. They're their own category. They have their own skill set. We're going to really focus on them as their own type of question. Then the remaining craft and structure questions that involve passages, I lump them in with the information and ideas questions because in my mind, if it's a passage question, the skill set is all the same. Why do we need to separate those out? You need to be able to see if that's where you're struggling. Luckily, standard English conventions, that's just grammar, so that category pretty much stays intact. And then for expression of ideas, like I said, that's really two categories in one, so I broke it out so that we have transitions and outlines separately, and you can then decide where you're struggling based specifically on which of those two you're getting the questions wrong with. Now, what do we do if we are struggling with one of these categories? Well, there's different things depending on the question type. And if you want to learn how to improve, you're going to need to go into my channel and look in much more detail at all the different strategy lessons. I have a 10-episode strategy series that I highly recommend that you use to start your prep. It's great for just giving you an overview of all of these types, but to give you even a faster overview, for both the vocabulary and passage questions, we're going to need to use the dumb summary strategy, which simplifies those passages and those words, sometimes just down to connotations. That is the main idea for the entire reading section, is dumb summaries. But yes, we are also going to need to learn new words, new vocabulary words. If we don't understand what we're reading, we're going to struggle trying to interpret it. But for the passage questions, we're also going to need to learn the strong words, strategies, and specifically how to find trap answer choices. Because in my experience, most people don't get these questions wrong because they misunderstand the passage. They get them wrong because they miss important trap answers in the answer choices. So we got to learn how to identify those. For grammar, it really is just about memorizing the grammar rules. There are some tricks there, but for the most part, the list of grammar rules is finite. There are only certain rules that they test. And so once you have those down, they're easy. You're going to see them again and again on every single test. That's the best thing about the grammar, is it's the same rules every time. So it's the best place to probably improve your score fast, is just to learn those rules and then start to spot them in every single place you can. The transition questions are also a little bit about memorizing. Here I have a lesson on learning the 4 categories that most transition words fall into. Once you do that, you can have a pretty good shot at getting those questions right. And then the outline questions are at the end of the section, and they're really easy. The reason people struggle with them is they either just don't know what they're being asked, so they don't read carefully enough, or they run out of time and they just don't really give these questions a fair shake. So hopefully with just learning how to pace yourself better, you can learn how to get to those questions, or at least save time for them so you can get those right. So if you are struggling with that expression of ideas category, it might just be that you ran out of time. So again, these categories are not necessarily that helpful for learning how to improve your score. That's why I suggest that whenever you take a Bluebook practice test, you go to my website, you go to my channel, and you use my videos to review those questions. I will always review anything that you need to memorize, like a grammar rule or a vocab word, but I will also show you the big picture strategies that are going to help you improve your scores. And yes, you will use my categories instead, but they will line up enough with the SAT's categories that you can take your real scores and start to understand a little bit about what you need to work on, and then use my resources to hopefully improve those areas. So if you have any questions or any thoughts, please put them in the comments. But as always, please, just thank you for watching. Please subscribe. It definitely helps me out. And remember, when it comes to your scores, don't settle for less. Settele for more.